Hey everyone, Alex Williams of the News Tack here, and today we're talking about the Amazon Web Services shared security model, but in the context of you, how you're managing your workloads, how you're managing tools, and how you're working with the infrastructure underneath that AWS is responsible for. To simplify, the model can be broken into 3 layers. Infrastructure is on the bottom. Above is all the cloud security we hear about, the posture, so to speak, that teams take. And on top, the workloads and software that runs on AWS services. The world is full of problems. We all know that very well. Cloud services really are no different. There's all kinds of issues that an engineer faces every day. There's puzzles to solve. There's priorities that you need to really be considerate of. And there's also the issues that come when you don't really think about the problem at all. That's when the real trouble starts.
In the case of just a server, as an example, an organization still has to worry about patching that server, applying updates.
It's quite complex when an organization uses a variety of tools that are managed by different teams. But in the cloud these days, it's getting easier to converge different data sources into one graph model.
Historically, those 2 layers have oftentimes been looked at as distinct individual kinds of things to secure, like different planes managed by different teams, and they didn't really talk to each other. I think what you're starting to see more now is convergence, where people realize that it's not good enough to have just different tools to cover those layers, but you need to have convergent data across those tools, the ability to make use of that information. And a really good example of that is if you have a vulnerability, for example, within one of your container images, you're going to have, probably thousands and thousands of these in any environment. How do you know which ones are most important? Well, you want to know which ones are most important by which ones might be exposed from the internet. And you have to have that visibility from the workload level, where the vulnerability is, all the way down into the infrastructure level to know what that infrastructure is exposed as, to give you that risk ranking.
It also demonstrates the importance of identity and protocols in the shared responsibility model. What if an engineer leaves the team? How do you manage that so passwords and keys can't be used again by an intruder? How do you manage certificates so they are only temporary and can't be used again and again and again by an attacker?
Not only did somebody just SSH as the root user or Ubuntu user, EC2 user, whatever it is, but here is the specific identity of that user. And on top of that, with Teleport, you get an entire session recording of what exactly they did throughout that session.
To protect users, vendors sell lots of tools, but it still remains a question about their effectiveness. Orca Security CEO and co-founder Avi Shula said all these tools are like locks waiting to be picked.
In my opinion, no organization should really have a database security tool, a Kubernetes security tool, an identity tool, a vulnerability tool, because when you take this approach, essentially you have too many data points that is the equivalent of getting a list of which are the most easy to pick locks in my organization, completely disregarding where these locks resides and what's behind them. The only way that we can actually tackle the issue of security seriously is by taking a full stack approach that essentially looks at the issue as a graph.
Most attacks follow a pattern. An intruder may find a vulnerability that they access through the internet. That leads to a load balancer, perhaps, and they get access to keys. Perhaps those keys lead into a database where all that customer data is located. This is when the real trouble arises.
There is very few of them that you need to tackle, versus trying to look at each problem separately and ending up with millions of discrete alerts. There's a common saying that attackers think in graph, they think of a way in, and defenders too many times think in list. And as long as it stays that way, then attackers win.
Here's one thing you can do. How about unifying all the data? Couldn't do that in the enterprise in that old shop that you once had, but in the cloud, it's a different story.
The on-premise world, it wasn't really feasible because you had to take many data sources from many different areas, from many different tools. For example, to understand the networking, you needed to tap into your router, to your firewall. To understand the database, it was one tool. To look at vulnerabilities, you needed to tap to another data source. So it wasn't really practical to combine all of this data into one place. Now, the cloud changes that, because essentially what's happening in the cloud is that all of this data is usually sourced in one place.
But what about the top layer? What about that top pancake where you put the butter? How about containers that run on an EC2 instance? What's their vulnerability posture and how are they configured? The container is in one layer, the instance is on another. Historically, these two layers have been looked at as individual items to secure. What you're starting to see more of now is convergence, where people realize it's not good enough to have different tools to cover those two distinct layers.
All of those integrations allow us to be in the places where developers already are and not force them to step out of tools and workflows that they're already familiar with. And that's really what I think is most crucial for it, is you have to meet developers in the places that they already are versus trying to get them to adopt or to change their practices.
In summary, the bottom layer may be the responsibility of Amazon Web Services, but you better have the protections in place to prevent from getting attacked. The middle layer, what's your posture management there? And on top, how are you exposed to the internet? Thanks for watching, everyone. And as usual, like and subscribe to us on YouTube. Look for us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, wherever you like to follow the News Stack. And come visit us. Come visit us at the News Stack. That's thenewsstack.io.